There's a silent contract between a home and the people who live in it, an unspoken exchange that happens every time we cross the threshold. No matter how modern the architecture, how elegant the decor, or how expensive the furniture, some spaces feel energetically dry, even hollow. And others, often the most humble, seem to pulse with life, offering a sense of peace, protection, and quiet abundance the moment you enter. This isn't about interior design. This is about the invisible forces that pass through the doorway. In classical Feng Shui, the main entrance is known as the mouth of Qi, the exact place where the life force of a home is drawn in. And if that mouth is neglected, disrupted, or clogged, then everything inside the house, health, money, relationships, clarity, can begin to suffer without visible cause. It doesn't matter how much effort you put into other areas of your life. If your entry is energetically compromised, the flow of your fortune is disrupted at the gate. This is where the red string comes in, not as decoration, not as superstition, but as intention made visible. Red in Eastern traditions is not just color, it is fire, protection, authority, and most importantly, movement. In Buddhist symbology, red protects against the subtle poisons of the mind: ignorance, attachment, aversion. In Feng Shui, it's the color that energizes stagnant corners and seals vulnerable entry points. So when a simple red string is tied to a door handle, it isn't just sitting there quietly, it's doing energetic work 24 hours a day. It becomes a spiritual filter, softly sifting through everything that attempts to enter your space. And only what aligns with your intention, your harmony, your prosperity, gets to pass through. This is not about magical thinking. It's about the subtle science of spatial energy, how our environments reflect and shape our inner state, and more importantly, how tiny adjustments can lead to real, observable shifts. In this video, I'll share with you the deeper meanings behind the red string tradition, how to apply it correctly, and why it still matters in our modern lives, especially when paired with sincere intention and right timing. I'll also tell you the story of a woman who used this practice not to fix her life, but to anchor it, and how it quietly turned everything around. Before we go further, let me ask you for one small favor. If this topic resonates with something unspoken within you, please consider giving this video a like, a share, and subscribing to New Day Mindfulness. Your support helps me reach the first milestone of 1,000 followers, which allows me to continue creating deeper, more meaningful content for you, and for everyone who's quietly searching for ways to live with more alignment, clarity, and energetic stability. Whether you believe in energy or not, whether you've practiced Feng Shui before or you're simply curious, know this: the space you live in is shaping you right now, and the entrance to your home is speaking on your behalf, even when you're not listening. Let's take a closer look at what it's saying and how a single red thread can gently but powerfully help change the tone of your entire life. Energy, entryways, and symbols in Feng Shui. In classical Feng Shui, the front door holds an irreplaceable role, not merely as a passage, but as the mouth of Qi, or Cao Qi in Vietnamese metaphysical vocabulary. This term refers to the primary gateway through which all energetic nourishment enters the living space. Much like the human body draws in sustenance through the mouth, a home draws in fortune, harmony, vitality, and balance through its front entrance. What is often overlooked in modern architectural design is that the configuration of a home's entrance, its direction, cleanliness, openness, and vibrational condition, determines the overall health of the internal environment, both energetically and emotionally. A cluttered, poorly maintained, or energetically blocked front door does not just create a physical inconvenience. It creates a disruption in the flow of Qi, which in turn can affect every area of the occupant's life, from finances to relationships to emotional clarity. Feng Shui teachings have emphasized for centuries that energy always enters first, and everything else follows. Therefore, to elevate the energy of any home or workspace, one must begin with the entry point, the mouth of the house. In parallel with this architectural principle is a spiritual law that Buddhism has quietly echoed for centuries. That form always follows intention. The term ingip in Buddhist philosophy can be translated as mental karma or the karma of thought. Before a chair is built, there is a mental image of a chair. Before a conversation is spoken, there is an intention behind it. Before any gesture, large or small, emerges into form, it begins as a seed in the mind. The door, in this context, becomes a mirror of intention. How we treat it, decorate it, respect it, or ignore it is a direct reflection of how conscious or unconscious we are about what we allow into our lives. If the door is dark, obstructed, cracked, or spiritually unattended, that neglect will echo into the experiences that pass through it. On the other hand, a well-tended, energetically aligned entry point can serve as both a beacon and a boundary, magnetizing the energies we wish to welcome while quietly repelling those that do not serve us. This is why the seemingly small details, color, material, shape, and even symbolic objects become powerful communicators between the visible and the invisible. In Feng Shui, no item is considered just an object. A mirror placed at the wrong angle can deflect energy away. A plant placed near the door can soften sharp corners and attract gentle qi. A metal wind chime can disperse stagnant energy and invite harmony. These are not merely aesthetic decisions, they are energetic directives. Every item in your environment broadcasts a silent message, either aligning with your goals or contradicting them. And it is here in this silent language of symbolism that the red string begins to speak. It is more than a piece of thread, it is a coded message. And that message, when placed with awareness, becomes a command to the energy entering your space. Protect, harmonize, elevate. Red in both Chinese metaphysics and Buddhist iconography carries frequencies of fire, activity, confidence, and spiritual protection. It is not a soft or passive color. It is assertive without aggression. Red activates. In temples, red is used in doorway curtains to guard against unseen forces. In marriage ceremonies, it is used to represent joy and sacred union. In offerings, it is paired with golden incense as a way to honor the divine. In talismans, it is tied around sacred items to keep them energetically sealed. When you apply red to your entryway, particularly in the form of thread, it becomes a bridge between the material and immaterial, a visible signature of your intention to protect, attract, and transform. In practical Feng Shui application, red is also used to counteract areas afflicted by stagnant, missing, or harsh energy. For example, if the front door faces a sharp corner, a long hallway, or another door directly opposite, the qi entering the space may be too fast, too fragmented, or too shallow. Tying a red string to the handle, especially when looped with symbolic numbers like 3 or 7, helps stabilize and redirect the energy to flow more smoothly. Red is also associated with the south direction in the Bagua map, which governs recognition, visibility, and inspiration. Therefore, using red at the entrance can gently stimulate energies related to confidence, leadership, and creative movement, making it ideal for those who seek to enhance their public life, career progression, or sense of presence in the world. But perhaps the most important aspect of this practice is not the color itself, nor the material, nor the placement. It is the mindfulness with which it is done. Feng Shui without intention is just decoration. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that karma is not determined only by the act, but by the awareness behind it. To tie a red string to your door without presence is like reciting a mantra while thinking of your to-do list. The power diminishes. On the other hand, to tie that string with reverence, speaking softly to the space, setting a quiet intention, even if only internally, activates its potential. That is when the string becomes more than a thread. It becomes a silent protector, a spiritual gatekeeper, and a daily reminder that the energy we carry into our lives is not random, but invited. Understanding this also means we must be vigilant about the symbolic pollution we allow into our environments. A broken doormat, a pile of unused shoes, an entrance shadowed by disrepair. These may seem minor, but in the language of Feng Shui, they are messages. They say, this space is not watched, this home is not defended, this energy is not directed. And when you begin to clean, repair, align, and activate your entry space, even with something as humble as a red string, you begin to reverse those messages. You begin to reclaim agency over your energetic landscape. This is where form and intention finally meet. The red string becomes not just a tool of protection, but a signature of clarity, a declaration that your space is not open to all things, but only to those which uplift, align, and support your well-being. It signals that you are paying attention. And in the world of energy, attention is everything. What makes the red string powerful? The red string holds power not because of what it is, but because of what it represents and how it is used. At a surface level, it's easy to dismiss it as a thin strand of dyed fiber, usually cotton or silk, occasionally wool. But its strength lies not in its physical durability, but in its symbolic resonance and energetic function. In many traditional cultures, particularly those rooted in Eastern philosophies, symbolism is not considered optional or aesthetic. It is an active layer of reality that interacts with the physical world. The red string is one such example. Its vibrational value stems from the ancient belief that color, intention, and form combine to influence subtle energies. Red in this context is not just a visual choice. It is a metaphysical force that carries the qualities of yang, warmth, movement, assertiveness, and protection. It is the color of fire, not just the fire that burns, but the fire that illuminates, that purifies, that drives away shadows. When red thread is used with awareness, it takes on the same attributes, subtly emitting vibrational cues to the space it inhabits, and forming a kind of energetic threshold that distinguishes one state from another. Safety from vulnerability, peace from chaos, clarity from confusion. This is why the red string is so prevalent across cultural systems. In Chinese folk belief, red thread is often tied to sacred objects or entrances to ward off malevolent spirits, to attract good luck during festivals like Lunar New Year, and to bless new beginnings such as weddings or childbirth. In Tibetan spiritual practice, red thread is sometimes worn around the wrist as a blessing after receiving teachings or completing a ritual imbued with mantras in the energy of lineage masters. In Hindu and Indian traditions, red thread, known as kalava or moli, is tied during ceremonies to mark protection and spiritual resolve. What's consistent across these traditions is not blind superstition, but a shared understanding that energy moves where attention flows, and that symbolic materials help to hold and stabilize that intention over time. When the red string is used at the threshold of the home, its function becomes clear: to delineate a space of sanctity, to announce to the universe that this boundary is watched and blessed, and to filter the invisible energies that attempt to enter, especially those that are incoherent or disruptive. The material itself matters. Natural fibers like cotton or silk are chosen not just for tradition, but because they are porous. They breathe, they absorb, they interact with their environment. Synthetic materials, while visually similar, often lack this subtle conductivity. A cotton string, once tied and charged with intention, will begin to hold on to the surrounding energies, both protecting and signaling at the same time. It becomes a living component of the space, not simply an object added to decor. This is where we must understand that power does not reside in the object itself. It resides in the interaction between the object and our consciousness. A red string tied carelessly, mindlessly as a trend, or because someone said it works, will not yield the same result as one placed with sincerity, clarity, and emotional alignment. This is not a magic formula, but a practice of inner presence applied through external form. In Buddhist thought, this principle is echoed in the concept of right intention, that every act we take, no matter how small, is colored by the seed of motivation behind it. Tie a string in anger or fear, and you plant those emotions into the field of your space. Tie it with reverence, with the quiet intention to protect, uplift, and purify, and that is the energy that will gradually settle around you. Moreover, the red string becomes a symbolic contract. It marks a decision, a commitment to energetic hygiene, and a stand for clarity at the entrance of one's life. It says, I choose what comes in, I choose what stays out. This threshold is not passive, it is claimed, it is watched. In a world that is increasingly chaotic, where people are bombarded with noise, stress, and invasive energies every time they step outside, having a point of conscious boundary, even one as simple as a red thread, becomes a deeply empowering act. It anchors us into our space with purpose. It reminds us each time we pass through the doorway that we are stepping into a space that has been blessed by intention. This reinforcement is subtle, but over time it shifts the vibrational quality of a home. Visitors may not notice the thread, but they will often comment that the space feels good or feels calm. That is not a coincidence. It is the cumulative effect of energy being filtered and directed consistently through symbolic practices like this. The red string is also versatile in its communication. Its placement, number of loops, and the way it is tied can be adjusted to reflect specific intentions. 3 loops might reflect balance between heaven, earth, and human action. 7 loops might represent completeness or alignment with the 7 chakras. A single knot may serve to lock in an affirmation or prayer. None of these are required, and none of them are inherently powerful on their own. But when selected with mindfulness, they become extensions of your will, quiet agents of transformation that require no maintenance beyond your continued awareness. That's the true power of symbolic practice. It doesn't work because you believe in magic. It works because belief itself is a form of energy, and energy responds to clarity. In other words, belief fuels intention, and intention reshapes outcomes. When someone sees a red string tied to a door handle, they may not understand it. They may dismiss it as cultural artifact or decorative quirk. But when that string is tied by someone who understands the mechanics of energy, the law of symbolic transmission, and the responsibility of threshold consciousness, then it becomes a tool of real consequence. It shifts the narrative of the home from reactive to intentional, from porous to protected, from cluttered to centered, and all without noise or confrontation, just the quiet presence of a thread doing its work. It's not the red string that changes your life. It's the decision you make when you tie it. The red string becomes a reminder of that decision, a subtle ally that whispers back to you every time your hand touches the door. That whisper may be the very thing that helps you reset your energy before stepping out into the world, or the thing that guards your peace when returning home at the end of a long day. And in that way, something as humble as a thread becomes a thread through your life, stitching together moments of intention that form the tapestry of a more mindful, empowered way of living. How to apply this practice properly? To apply the red string practice correctly and meaningfully, one must begin by understanding that this is not a matter of superstition or habit, but an act of energetic clarity that requires precision, patience, and presence. The choice of material is the first and perhaps most underestimated decision. Red string made from cotton or silk is not only traditional, but functionally superior for energetic conductivity. Cotton, being natural and breathable, absorbs and emits subtle energy in a way synthetic fibers simply cannot. Silk, revered in many ancient cultures, carries an even finer vibrational field and is often used in temple rituals and sacred wrappings because of its ability to hold intention and purity. Synthetic strings, regardless of appearance, lack the elemental resonance needed to interact with qi. They may serve as visual placeholders, but do not carry the same energetic frequency or responsiveness as natural fibers, which is why the material should be chosen with both respect and awareness. Length also matters, not just for aesthetics or ease of tying, but for symbolic reasons. A length of 50 to 60 centimeters, roughly 20 to 24 inches, gives you enough room to loop the string 3 to 7 times around the door handle without strain or awkwardness. This is important because the act of looping is not merely mechanical, it's symbolic. In Chinese numerology, odd numbers are associated with growth, evolution, and movement, while even numbers suggest completion or stillness. 3 loops may signify harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. 5 may reflect the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, in their balancing dance. 7 may correspond to spiritual completeness, often connected to the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, which in Taoist cosmology are tied to cosmic protection and higher wisdom. Each loop becomes a mini meditation, an act of sealing an intention with every turn. This is why rushing through the tying process or doing it carelessly not only reduces the effectiveness, but reverses the energy. It becomes a representation of mindlessness, which then permeates the entrance of the home. Placement is equally essential. While most people focus on the front door, and rightly so, as it is the main mouth of qi, it is also worth considering secondary portals of high-energy traffic. This includes the bedroom door, especially for those experiencing unrest, relationship tension, or troubled sleep. It also includes the door to the home office or workspace, particularly for those seeking to amplify focus, creativity, or income flow. Each doorway has its own energetic signature. The front door governs public-facing energy, invitations from the outside world, and financial opportunities. The bedroom governs intimacy, rest, and psychological integration. The study or office controls intellect, execution, and self-worth in relation to work. Applying the red string to any of these should be done with conscious alignment to the specific energetic intention you're addressing. Never apply the string to every door indiscriminately. This is like applying the same medicine to every part of the body without diagnosis. The power of this practice is in its specificity. As for the knot, this is not simply about securing the thread, but about locking in the intention. A loosely tied knot sends a signal of instability. A tight, angry knot signals force or fear. The knot should be firm but gentle, deliberate but not rigid. In Feng Shui, the act of knotting represents sealing the energy, making the declaration nonverbal, yet enduring. Knots also have meaning in Buddhist practice, such as the endless knot, which represents interconnection and continuity. Although you don't need to tie a complex pattern, using a number of knots that aligns with symbolic numerology enhances the transmission. For most, 3 or 7 knots will suffice. 3 echoes the Buddhist 3 jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. 7 resonates with spiritual awakening and layered protection. It's not about the number itself, but about consistency between action and belief. If you tie 7 loops, consider making 7 knots as a way of rhythmic reinforcement. Perhaps the most overlooked component of this entire practice is mental state. The red string will reflect the energy with which it was tied. If you are rushed, irritated, skeptical, or desperate, the thread will hold those frequencies and broadcast them every time someone touches the handle. This does not mean you must be perfect or enlightened when performing the ritual, but you must be sincere. The best time to do this is when your mind is settled, your breath is deep, and your heart is quiet. You can support this state by lighting a single stick of sandalwood or agar wood incense, known in both Buddhist and Taoist rituals to purify the environment and calm the nervous system. You don't need chants, music, or elaborate ceremonies. All that is required is your undivided attention and the willingness to enter into a relationship with your space. This relationship, much like a marriage or a friendship, is based on small but repeated acts of respect. While the act of tying the string only takes a few minutes, the preparation begins earlier. Clean the door handle, wipe down the area around it, make sure the entrance is free of clutter, trash, or broken items. These actions are not mere housekeeping. They are energetic statements. Every object around the door is part of the ritual, even if unspoken. A dusty light fixture dulls the brightness of your intention. An old mat that hasn't been cleaned in months blocks the welcome energy from settling in. A stack of shoes at the threshold disperses incoming chi and creates a scattered field. Address these physical imbalances first. Then, when the string is tied, it will not be competing with mixed signals. Instead, it will become the anchor of an already coherent entrance. Once the string is tied, treat it with reverence but not fear. Don't obsessively check it. Don't worry if someone touches it. Don't tie a second string the next day because you're unsure if the first one worked. Like any intentional act, it needs time, consistency, and trust. The string is not a command, it is a companion. It works because it was placed with bearing and clarity. If it falls off naturally after several weeks or months, you may replace it with the same reverence. If it frays or breaks suddenly, observe what's happening in your life. It may be reflecting a shift in your energetic boundaries. In this way, the red string becomes more than protection. It becomes a dialogue. And in that ongoing conversation between space, spirit, and self, a new kind of awareness begins to unfold. One that honors simplicity, presence, and the quiet power of ritual without performance. A modern application that changed an outcome. Sometimes the shift we need doesn't begin with a plan or a strategy or even a prayer. It begins with noticing a heaviness in the air, a quiet discomfort that creeps in around the edges of our daily routine. A space that used to feel bright and open now sits stale, as if something invisible has taken root in the corners. That was the first thing Mai noticed. It wasn't the drop in sales or the way her son had started waking up irritable. It was the way her home, once her refuge, had become strangely dense, as if even the walls were tired. The sewing machine she'd used for 10 years sat in the same corner. The rolls of fabric were stacked neatly. Her clients, mostly neighborhood women who ordered custom aisle dye and children's clothes, had once called weekly, even daily. But for weeks now, the phone stayed quiet, and when it did ring, it wasn't work. It was noise, bills, noise, small worries that clung to her like static. One evening, while sweeping the tiled floor just before dinner, she paused at the front door. Something felt wrong, but not in a way she could explain. She looked at the handle, plain and metallic. Something in her memory stirred. Not a memory she had created, but one that had been given to her. Her grandmother, who passed away when Mai was still young, had a habit of tying thin red thread around objects that mattered. The altar, the old wooden box where she kept family heirlooms. Even once, Mai remembered, she saw her grandmother tie a red thread gently around a papaya tree just before Tet, whispering something Mai didn't understand. At the time, She thought it was just old tradition. But standing at the doorway now, Mai didn't feel silly. She felt called. She went to her sewing basket, not for ceremony, just instinct. She took out a roll of red cotton thread meant for children's ao-dai embroidery and measured out a length, guessing somewhere near 2 feet. Slowly, with a stillness she hadn't felt in weeks, she wrapped it around the silver door handle. Once, twice, again. 7 times in all. She tied a small knot. Nothing elaborate, but something shifted the moment her fingers let go. It wasn't that business turned around the next morning. It wasn't a sudden rush of wealth or a client sending a big order, but she noticed her son slept through the night for the first time in a month. She noticed she stopped clenching her jaw in her sleep. A neighbor who had once promised to order 3 outfits for her niece finally came by to pay. Small things, not miracles, but signals, like a garden breathing after weeks without rain. Within 2 weeks, she was sewing every evening again. Not overworked, not overwhelmed, just steady, balanced, in rhythm. The home no longer felt heavy, it felt watched over. That red string didn't change her fate, it changed her posture, her attention, her relationship with her space. And that changed everything else. Because the string wasn't magic, it was memory, it was intention, it was a boundary. And in a world where energy enters without knocking, she had quietly told the universe, this is my space, this is where I protect, this is where I build. And now I want to pause here just for a moment to ask something small from you. If you're feeling the quiet power of this story, if something inside you is nodding in recognition, I gently invite you to help me grow this channel. Please take a second to click, like, share this video with someone you care about, and subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. Your support brings me closer to our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers, a threshold that will help me create and share even more transformative content with you, week after week. Because just like Mai, I believe small, sincere acts create the biggest ripple. And by helping this channel reach more people, you're helping spread mindful energy into homes all around the world. Now let's return to the wisdom behind Mai's story. Not just what happened, but why it happened. When she tied that thread, she didn't hope for magic. She didn't beg the string to solve her problems. She realigned herself with a tradition that honors the entrance as sacred. In Feng Shui, we call it Kao Qi, the mouth of Qi. In Buddhist insight, we call it the place where intention becomes form. And she had given her doorway a new form, woven with attention and quiet power. That's the real takeaway. The thread didn't fix her, it reminded her to show up, to honor the home she was building, to hold space for light to re-enter, not through force, but through respect. What to combine with the red string? When considering what to combine with the red string to subtly enhance its energetic effect, the principle that must guide every choice is intentional simplicity. Not every symbolic item you have seen in Feng Shui shops or spiritual markets needs to be placed at your doorway. And in truth, adding too many elements can cause more confusion than clarity. In the subtle architecture of energy, clutter, even spiritual clutter, dilutes focus. Energy follows direction, and direction requires space. Therefore, the first rule is to only combine what aligns with your personal intention, and to do so with understanding, not out of superstition or mimicry. Feng Shui coins are one of the most frequently misunderstood but powerful enhancements when used correctly. The most traditional configuration is a set of 3 Chinese coins bound together with a red ribbon or thread, forming a small, tight unit that symbolizes the harmonious balance between heaven, earth, and humanity. These 3 forces represent the cosmological triad in Chinese metaphysics: heaven, the source of destiny and unseen patterns; earth, the ground of nourishment and support; and man, the conscious actor whose choices determine how well he aligns with the first 2. When this triad is bound in unity, it becomes a magnet for balanced abundance. Not just wealth in terms of money, but opportunities, relationships, and beneficial timing. However, these coins are not effective simply because they exist. They must be chosen with care. The coins should ideally be replicas of ancient Chinese currency with square holes in the center, symbolizing heaven, the round outer shape, meeting earth, the square inner space. Newer mass-produced coins with meaningless inscriptions carry less energetic integrity. Before tying them to your red string or placing them nearby, they should be energetically cleared, either with gentle incense smoke or placed under moonlight for one night to remove previous impressions. When combined with your red string, they should be added as a deliberate act, not as an afterthought. Tie them in a way that they rest near the knot of the red string on your door handle, where they can both harmonize and anchor the field. Another object often introduced in advanced Feng Shui practices is the Pixiu, a mythical creature that resembles a lion-dragon hybrid and is believed to have the unique ability to draw in wealth while preventing it from leaving. In Feng Shui lore, Pixiu is revered for its appetite for gold and silver, and its vow to never expel what it consumes. As such, it symbolizes the retention of wealth rather than its reckless expenditure. While incredibly potent when properly honored, the Pixiu is not a decorative toy. It must be treated with the same respect you'd offer to a spiritual guardian. A Pixiu should be placed at the entrance facing outward, symbolically protecting the home and inviting prosperity to flow inward. It must be cleaned regularly, preferably with unscented clean water, and never placed directly on the floor, in the bedroom, or inside a bathroom. Before introducing it, one should mentally set an intention and, if possible, dedicate a moment of silence or acknowledgement, as if inviting a guest who is being entrusted with spiritual duties. It's important to note that not every home needs a Pixiu. If your financial goals are modest, or if your space is already dense with items, adding a Pixiu without clarity may agitate rather than stabilize. Use this symbol only if you're ready to take full responsibility for honoring its presence. A far simpler yet deeply elevating addition is the use of incense, particularly sandalwood or agar wood, known as tram in Vietnamese spiritual culture. While not required, the soft, slow-burning aroma of these woods gently lifts stagnant qi and prepares the air around your doorway to receive sacred intention. Sandalwood is traditionally associated with clarity, groundedness, and divine presence, making it suitable for those seeking emotional peace and mental focus. Agar-wood, on the other hand, is considered one of the highest vibrational scents used in Buddhist temples across Asia. It is known not just for its rarity, but for its ability to connect the earthly with the celestial. Lighting a stick of incense before tying your red string, or when adding any supplementary items such as coins or Pixiu, creates an energetic atmosphere that allows your intentions to take root more easily. This does not have to be performed with elaborate chanting or ritual. One deep breath and a moment of mental presence are sufficient. Always ensure the space is clean and quiet when you light the incense, and never leave it burning unattended. Let it be a soft exhale into your space, a spiritual fragrance that marks the boundary between the world outside and the sanctuary within. Now, a critical warning that too many forget in their enthusiasm to manifest results. Adding more objects does not create more energy. In fact, it often obstructs it. A doorway that is filled with symbols, coins dangling, crystals hanging, statues crowding the corners, may impress visitors but can confuse the energy field of your home. Feng Shui thrives on clarity. Each object is like a note in a song, and if every note is played at once, it becomes noise. When too many elements are introduced, the home's entrance may begin to feel like a marketplace or altar, rather than a space of welcome and transition. This dissonance weakens the effect of even the most potent symbols. Ask yourself what your home truly needs. Is it protection, direction, emotional upliftment? Choose one symbolic enhancer to combine with your red string and let it work in concert with your intention. Return to simplicity, return to clarity. Even traditional masters often remind us that Feng Shui is not about accumulation. It's about alignment. The red string is already doing work by creating a boundary of vibrational focus. If you choose to add to it, let it be with discernment, not desire. A home that holds clear energy does not need adornment to be powerful. It needs congruence. Congruence between form and spirit, between what is placed and why it is placed, between the silence of the doorway and the energy that passes through it. Common mistakes that drain a home's energy. The red string may seem like a simple tool, but its effectiveness depends entirely on the consciousness behind its use, and many unknowingly sabotage its potential through careless, misaligned practices. One of the most common mistakes is tying the string hastily or neglectfully, leaving it frayed, dusty, or loosely fastened as if it were just an accessory rather than an intentional energetic boundary. A red thread left to weather, unravel, or fade on a dirty door handle doesn't carry the frequency of protection or reverence. Instead, it communicates abandonment, indecision, and neglect. Just as a spiritual altar must be cleaned, refreshed, and honored over time, so too must the objects placed at the entrance of your home. When a red string becomes tattered and you allow it to remain that way, it becomes less a symbol of shielding and more a container of energetic residue. The object begins to absorb rather than deflect unwanted energy, and instead of creating a filter, it creates stagnation. Maintenance is not an afterthought, it's an extension of intention. Equally damaging is the timing and emotional context in which the red string is tied. Applying it during a moment of emotional case, during an argument, under duress, or while mentally distracted, essentially embeds that emotional frequency into the object itself. In energetic terms, intention is not just what you say, it is what you feel at the moment of action. If your thoughts are scattered, anxious, or angry when you tie the string, then those subtle frequencies become woven into the thread's vibrational field. The result is an unstable boundary, a symbolic seal that leaks rather than holds. This doesn't mean you have to be in a meditative state, but it does require calm sincerity. Even 1 minute of conscious breath, a pause to realign your emotions, or the lighting of incense to shift your mental state is enough to ensure the act is rooted in grounded presence. The thread then becomes not only an energetic statement, but a personal signature of emotional maturity. Another common misstep is treating the red string as a trend, a decorative superstition picked up from social media, blogs, or hearsay without a deeper understanding of its origin and purpose. When an object is used purely as a visual novelty, it loses its ritual potency. The symbolic function of the red thread is activated by the awareness and reverence of the one who places it. Without that connection, the act is no more powerful than hanging a random ribbon on a doorknob. Intention must precede an action. In Buddhist philosophy, this principle is known as chanda, volition. It is not about belief in the string itself, but about the energy you place into the space through your decision to tie it. Rituals become empty when stripped of volition, and energy work becomes decoration when stripped of understanding. If you are applying the red string simply because someone told you it brings luck, or because it looked interesting, pause. Ask yourself why. If the answer is rooted in fear, trend following, or desperation for instant results, then take a step back. Cleanse your energy first. Set a true intention. Then return with clarity and ownership. That shift will determine whether your ritual becomes noise or becomes power. Finally, the condition of the door itself cannot be ignored. The red string may carry symbolic charge, but if it is placed on a door that is filthy, cluttered, or poorly maintained, the impact becomes diminished. sometimes even reversed. In classical Feng Shui, the entryway is considered the spiritual mouth of the home, the place where life force enters and exits. Just as you wouldn't eat from a contaminated bowl or drink from a rusted cup, you shouldn't expect energy to nourish your space through a blocked, sticky, or squeaky door. A door covered in dust, burdened with random objects, or surrounded by piles of shoes and forgotten items creates confusion for incoming qi. The space begins to vibrate with incoherence, and the red string loses its function as a filter. The first step to any successful energetic intervention is to purify the environment. Clean the door handle with a natural cleanser, wipe down the frame, check for spider webs, grime, or signs of neglect. Lubricate hinges so that the movement of the door is smooth and quiet, just as energy should be. The red string should be placed only after the space has been physically honored. If you skip this step, no symbolic act will correct the underlying misalignment. Ultimately, the red string is not a charm or talisman to be feared or glorified. It is a mirror, and how you treat it reflects how you treat the doorway between your outer world and your inner sanctuary. Whether it protects or deteriorates depends not on its color or fiber, but on the attention, timing, emotion, and clarity with which it is used. Respect that, and this small thread becomes not just a symbol, but a silent ally in the architecture of your life. Final of all the things we do to protect and elevate our lives, the most profound are often the least dramatic. A single red string, tied with sincerity, doesn't shout for attention. It doesn't beg for results. It simply holds space. And in holding space, it does something extraordinary. It reminds us that energy is real, that boundaries matter, and that attention shapes experience. It turns the ordinary act of entering your home into a moment of quiet awareness. Each time your hand reaches the door handle, it meets that thread, and in that subtle encounter, your mind is asked to pause, just briefly, and return to intention. What am I inviting into my space today? What am I leaving behind? Am I awake to what this doorway says about me, about my life, about my values? Because your doorway is speaking, even when you are not. Through its care or neglect, through the presence or absence of attention, it sends a message into the energetic world. And that message is what returns to you again and again. The red string doesn't protect your home by magic. It protects your focus. It tells the energy that enters. This space is not random. This life is not unguarded. And what flows here flows with meaning. Feng Shui does not replace effort. It refines it. It shapes the unseen so that your seen world, the one of actions, decisions, relationships, can move with more clarity and less resistance. Energy is never still. It is always moving toward coherence or chaos. And the red string, when used with intention, becomes a tiny but potent lever that tilts that motion in your favor. So ask yourself, not just as a homeowner or a spiritual seeker, but as someone shaping their life one choice at a time. What is the energetic statement your doorway is making right now? Does it say, this space is sacred? Does it say, only peace may enter? Or is it silent, unattended, drifting with whatever energy happens to pass through? Try the red string, not with superstition, not with performance, but with sincerity. Tie it gently, mindfully, after cleaning the space and clearing your thoughts. Breathe. Knot it with intention, then wait. Not for fireworks, not for miracles, just for alignment, and watch. Not for what changes overnight, but for what begins to flow again. Maybe it's a conversation that feels easier, a decision that finally becomes clear, a lightness in the body as you come home after a long day. These are the quiet signs of real transformation, the ones that don't shout, but last. And now I would love to hear from you. Have you ever used symbolic objects like a red string, coins, or incense to improve the energy of your space or even your own life? What have you noticed? What shifted? What quietly transformed? Please share your story in the comments below. Your voice may help someone else begin their journey with more confidence and clarity. And if this video sparks something for you, even just a small moment of recognition, I warmly invite you to like this video, subscribe to New Day Mindfulness, and help us reach our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Every new voice here strengthens the intention behind this channel to explore ancient wisdom, not as superstition, but as simple truths that still quietly shape our lives. Because real change rarely begins with grand gestures. It begins with awareness, with presence, and sometimes with a single red thread. If you're ready to bring more of that energy into your space and your life, stay close. We have more to explore, and this journey is only just beginning.